Welcome to the Heart of the Moment, where we explore the big questions, the bold ideas, and the stories that shape our lives. Today, we're diving into a film that has been making waves, and I'm so excited. It's a story about forgiveness and the hard work of letting go. But this isn't just any movie, it's a film that at its core challenges us to look at ourselves and the people in our lives in new ways. The movie stars Academy Award nominee Anjanou Ellis Taylor, alongside Golden Globe winner Andra Day, Andre Holland, and Tony Award nominee John Earl Jelks, and is written and directed by renowned painter Titus Kaphar. And here to help me unpack it all are two insightful brothers. Ariel Prater, research specialist for Black Play and Culture at the Strong National Museum of Play. Ariel is a blogger, curator, and cultural critic, while at the Strong, Ariel has developed several exhibits exploring play as the quintessential contextual framework for the exploration of Black life. And then there's Jason M. Porter, a scholar, educator, and writer specializing in environmental history, Black geographies, and Afro-Latin American studies. Known for his engaging storytelling and in-depth research, Jason bridges academic insight with accessible narratives to inspire thought-provoking conversations. His work sheds light on the intersections of social justice, ecology, and history, making him a compelling voice in contemporary discourse. And I'm happy to have them here with me. So, together we'll dig into the layers of this story, what it says about Black men, the Black community, forgiveness, and how it reflects and maybe even challenges the world we're living in today. So, call your mama Nam, grab a seat, open your mind, and let's get to the heart of the moment. So welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
be here. Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
for joining me
Be
today.
here.
Yeah, I mean, this is an honor for me to have both of you who I've known different lengths of times, but your perspectives and insights have influenced me and helped me in ways that you don't even know. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this movie. Before I dive into questions, I just want to know, like, initial 30-second reaction to the film Exhibiting Forgiveness.
I really enjoyed it. I appreciated the I appreciated it reminded me honestly a lot of another film I watched recently,
Mhm.
American Fiction. And kind of how it kind of really talked about in many ways like the hidden labor of Black women holding families together broken down by fathers.
Mhm.
And in American Fiction, the sister is holding everything together and dies very early, and you can see these brothers come together and have to deal with each other. And I felt like this did that. And this is not. I have to cite my sources too, because I had a conversation about this yesterday when I brought this up. But my friend said that they feel like, and there's a Black studies scholar, Henry Washington Jr., said that they felt like it did it better, particularly around how they held the commodification of Black art
Mhm.
in regard. So I really thought it really went really well with American Fiction in a lot of different ways, and I really enjoyed it.
How about you, Ariel?
Wow, not to step on your toes, brother. I was going to say something very similar. I was I was genuinely entranced by the conversation we're having around Black strength and the development of Black men, but also how that was held against the backdrop of Black women, right? How they hold us not only responsible, but in tenderness as we move forward towards what our greatest expectations of ourselves are. Um, she was the bridge of the divide. And I think in these films, we see Black moms disappear too soon. It's a trope that we talk about a lot in hood films of the early 90s. The mom just drops off the son, and all of a sudden, like there's a conversation of development that only the men can have. But I think that conversation is devoid of the influence and the necessary confluence of Black women at the center, right? They are the home, the understanding of ourselves, but also what does that look like in the angelicization and the demonization conversation that we're having with both our parents, right? They're on different pedestals, but in either case, they're non-human, right? And so I wanted to understand more from this film what forgiveness was, as we still try to unpack that in our community, as we're expected to offer it, but still are unpacking it.
So, as the theme of forgiveness, as it runs deeply through the movie, and for the actor Andre Holland, who does an amazing job, and so does Anjanou Ellis and Andrew Day and Mr. Jelks, Broadway star who came to film and I think just does an amazing job as the father. But this theme of forgiveness that runs through, that is not necessarily associated with Black men or manhood in that way. We are often many things, but forgiveness is not something that is focused on us. Like even in the movie, it's the female, the mother is the catalyst for it. The author or the writer and director, Kafar, he said that it was a conflation of his mother and his grandmother, and so that's who the Anjanou Ellis character was. And so, as that is not necessarily associated with manhood in our community, how do you think it speaks to the unique challenges that Black men face in extending forgiveness to people or even seeking it ourselves?
I mean, tenderness is at the heart of forgiveness, I think. Again, we're still unpacking this term because it's one that I've been working to understand for years. I've been asked to give forgiveness or accept forgiveness without ever understanding what it entails, what comprises forgiveness. Is it the forgetting of the wrong, or is it the acceptance of the wrong and committing to moving forward, or letting go of the relationship entirely? I'm still unpacking what exactly comprises forgiveness, but I know at the center of it is an understanding of humanity. And men, Black men specifically, are not afforded that humanity. First and foremost, we have to see ourselves as a provider. We have to see ourselves as developing something in order to be of value, right? So our bodies are innately commodified. Um, we don't have the option really to see each other. And so to forgive each other is nearly impossible, right? I'm so afraid of you because I've been taught to be afraid of me. And that I've lost the possibility to see you enough to afford you the right of failure, of an error, and the space to be tender with you as you correct that.
What are your
Um,
thoughts, Chase?
yeah, I mean, first, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that, examples matter. And, you kind of bringing up the role of forgiveness in the relationship of Black men in this film as a representation of that. I think for me personally, like I've had examples from a very early age, not very early age, but, I made a lot of mistakes when I was in high school and I was just extended so much forgiveness in my life. And I have been such a beneficiary of it that it's allowed me to kind of see the value and hold that moving forward in a lot of regards. One thing I think is interesting about, the how forgiveness was and forgiveness for whom, like how that was put together in this film was when the mother died, she died having not received forgiveness. He walked away from her, upset with her for how could she have put him in that position. And that was what we were presented was the cause. Not, I mean, obviously there was that earlier moment where she sighed on the phone. She should have said something, about leaving the hospital early or that earlier week, right? There was that moment, when you thought first the phone call was about the father, 10 minutes later, but then 30 minutes later you realize it was actually about her own health, right? But that sigh, she turns back and she's like, I have to reschedule, and she hangs up the phone. That was a moment, and so there's so much unforgiveness around the mother, honestly, right? Like she's not given extended a moment to be forgiven for her. Because I know, my grandmother passed away because she didn't tell my father what was going on. It's something that he's never forgiven himself for not knowing, right? It's something he's never fully forgiven her for not sharing, right? We all, I mean, taking care of our families as they get older, particularly men, they get so ornery and violent oftentimes. And like, I've had to lay men to rest near me, having to struggle for forgiving them for resenting me for caring for them when they can't care for themselves, right? But there was just so much around the mother, I think, where she, she dies in a moment, right, where she is not being extended forgiveness by the son. But I'll just say one more thing. I do think that similarly hidden is you don't see him reckon with that, which I feel like, did he forgive himself? Because like that would have been hard for me. Like had I been put my mother in that position, that was the last conversation I had with her. So for me, to me, there's a silence there that I don't necessarily love. Around how he had to reckon with that. Did he just feel guilt-free? Like, did he feel like that conversation was finished? I feel like that wasn't really. I mean, did painting the picture of her really like release him of that? Did yelling at that white man who bought the picture, did that? Did that So there's. I didn't particularly love how that was handled, but what I will say is my favorite person in the whole film, I think, is the brother. Moments with the brother were so awesome. Like when they were in the pool and he forgave his brother for like being highbrow now, doing his things. He's like, you better come and hit these rocks with me, bro. We're gonna be skipping these rocks. Don't act like you forgot, right? So like those moments, and then the brother must have forgiven him for when he didn't say nothing about how could you have done this to mother, how could you have said that to mother, like how could you have, the brother had pushed him to go and talk to his father and do it for the mom, right? Like he had particularly said that, but he didn't hold it against his brother that it went poorly. He didn't hold it against his brother that their conversation led to his mother having whatever heart failure took place, right? So there's so much unpacked forgiveness and unforgiveness around the moment of the mother passing away, which I felt like was completely not reckoned with in the film. And maybe that's what, that's for us to have conversations about, right? But I do feel like the forgiveness was so oriented towards, the father. You didn't necessarily have to reckon with how the brothers had to deal with their own forgiving themselves and their relationship with their mothers and their relationship with their fathers.
See, I think I have a slightly different take because I think he did forgive his mother. When his brother says to him, you have to talk to your pops. And he was like, I'm not doing that. He's like, we're doing it for mom. And I'm like, that triggers him into actually doing it because he'll do it for his mom. But because I had a similar situation growing up where first of all, let me back up and just say, I do not think that the mother is blameless. I think that the mother's job and the father's job is to take care of the child. And if the mother and father are in a situation that is detrimental to the child, and the mother is choosing her first love, I loved him. I love him still. Then he has a right to be angry and to say, why? Like, why am I, as the child who's helpless and defenseless, and y'all are supposed to look out for me? I mean, we see this in Black families. It's like, we know that uncle likes to fill on little girls or little boys, but y'all keep letting them come around. We do this with the R. Kelly thing. Often when people talk about it, they're like, oh, with this, everybody should be called in because there's a system around that let R. Kelly do what he did. It wasn't just him. And I'm like, but it's the same thing in our families. There's a web, a system that allows the children in our families to be set upon, to be abused, to be molested, and all of those things. So I think that his forgiveness was the fact that he was even fighting for understanding, for him saying to her, how, why, like, I'm here with you. I'm showing up with you still. I'm trying to get you a new house. I'm like still working with you because as sons, we look at our mothers and are still trying to protect them and get them in the best situation. And she's telling him, but I loved him. And so I think that that's really hard to wrestle with as a child, because although we see this grown man, he's still the child asking these questions. And I want to just say that I'm often upset with films because I love film as a medium. And I love acting and I love writing. I write scripts and I write books. I mean, I just love that creative process. But when it comes to films that are predominantly Black or Black films, however you want to list them, we don't get to have slow, methodical, organic, unfolding stories put on the screen. And so I was very excited from the beginning about this film because, like The Crown, what's the Black equivalent to The Crown? They get to take an hour to say 5 minutes worth of stuff. Not us. We need an exciting element. There has to be a car chase. There has to be a shootout. There has to be a death. There has to be like this funny thing where and I'm like, I don't want to minimize that. Like, that's part of our culture. But this film for me said, you get to be whole beings, because I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. I've been waiting for my story to come on the screen. I've said this for many years to people in interviews too, that like, I didn't grow up on the mean streets of Amarillo, Texas. There was no such thing. My fight was not with a gang. My fight was in the house.
Mhm.
My fight was in the house with a stepdad who was verbally abusive and didn't understand a little boy who was creative and a seer, and he understood work. So when I saw this, I'm like, it's not exactly my story, but I'm like, finally, we get a story.
Mhm.
And that's the one thing that most of the reviews said. They love it, but it was kind of slow. And so I'm wondering for you, as Audra Day sings in this, or the theme song for this, she says, "No foundation, building with bricks we were never given." How does this film resonate with you, with those lyrics and the slow building of it?
I think we rarely, as you said, get the opportunity to see our stories unfold at a pace that isn't breakneck, that isn't supposed to be exciting. It's almost as if we're constantly selling ourselves as a story to be told. Uh, and so I've often said, I don't want the fantastic. I want the mundane. I want to see everyday problems
Mhm.
made magic. And so I think this film snatched my bedroom out of my house and put it on the screen. My issue, of course, wasn't with a father. I didn't have one of those. I had a mother who was an agent of patriarchy, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Uh, but I think this film does what our community's been asking for, and it's just to tell stories about regular Black folks who have regular issues. However, I think at the center of this conversation is a universal struggle against the, the strictures of patriarchy, anti-Blackness, internalized or otherwise, especially at the art scene, right? At the intersection of art and culture, as we're dealing with the spaces that are supposed to be our way to breathe, right? They're still dealing with the agency, whether it be our actual agents or the white folks who are trying to sell us back ourselves, right? We're constantly in a conversation about how to be present. And I think this movie does a great job of allowing us to be seen, see ourselves, and show that to the world.
No, I agree. I really appreciated, Ariel, how you kind of started that, thinking about the importance of like kind of everydayness and the mundane. And I really do think like that's been had a lot of traction. Particularly, I feel like, I mean, I think it's always been there, but particularly now you see a lot of Black feminist writing, particularly around like everyday resistance, as something that is as revolutionary as, a rebellion, right? And these things as meaningful. And but to see that, but to see that squarely in this space, I thought was really, really beautiful. Um, oh, sugar, I should have wrote down what I was gonna say else about this, because I kind of forget. Oh, well, I mean, going back to Henry Washington Jr.'s point about kind of the dealing with the commodification of kind of Blackness and Black art, I really felt like this handled it with a lot of care. Um, I would love, I mean, there's so many conversations to have about how he, made the art, like even like the music they played when he was doing the art, like how they would show like the brush strokes, and they like showed him put things together. I thought was really interesting. But then kind of the conversations that he had with selling the art, right? Which were uniquely powerful. And I didn't feel like, and I mentioned the comparison early on with American Fiction, and Henry's point was like, yeah, I think it did what American Fiction did, but better, particularly around the slowness and the care that it tried to, present the selling of Black pain and struggle, right? So I thought that was particularly interesting. Um, I also really liked the kind of non-directness, like the grandson. was so ever present in the film. What was it, Terrence? Like, I can't,
Jermaine.
huh?
Jermaine.
Yes. Thank you. He was so constant, not even when he was there, but his name was like a recurring thing. It was something that was always on the mind. So like it was cool to kind of see the development slowly of like how this person, you got to unfold and see their different levels of fatherhood and dealing with this, which I thought was super, super kind of well put together. And yeah, even the cutscenes back, you know, how they kind of layered it. I didn't find it too slow at all. I love the soundtrack. I thought the music was really good. And I also think like one thing they did was really powerful was they knew when to not play music, right? And that really drew you in. So like the trash scene, for instance, I remember writing down before he stepped on the nail, like this is a powerful scene. It's completely silent. You just hear them messing in trash and they're getting dirty and it's just doing that undignified work with so much dignity and bringing dignity to it, but also the kind of violence that he was being forced to like work through and seeing that. I mean, that was the repetition of that scene was hard, right? Like it was so, I mean, that scene could have been 15 seconds. They drew that out, you know. He dropped the nail that he falls on a good 30, you know, like you looked at it and it's like, and you almost forgot about it by the time he stepped on it. You know, so I thought there was a lot of, you know, even in putting together, I'm no film critic or anything, but I enjoyed a lot of that.
Yeah.
I think you raised a great point, though, real quick, if I can. There was a meta commentary on Black art as an artist was talking to the man who was talking about hanging his paintings above his bed. And it almost felt like he was having a conversation directly with patriarchy. It was like, I cannot be commodified in the way that you want me to be. I cannot exist. My father is here, who is the result of patriarchy and inflicting patriarchy because of the system that you have created. And now I'm having a conversation with you talking about my body hanging above your bed. And it was like, when we're talking about Black art, it's like, what stories of ours are of value? What are they doing with our stories? And I'm grateful that the artist who put this together got the opportunity to engage with that directly and say, our stories are not to be handled with the kind of carelessness and callousness that leads you to want to give pieces of it to your child because it's not theirs. They're not ready to understand the weight, the depth. And if they are, then handle that with some kind of genuine conversation and not just, I'm not a trading card to be passed around. And so I think that meta conversation for me was really striking. I just wanted to hint on that, Jason. Thank you for bringing that up.
No, I appreciate that because I was thinking about this. I was at this speakeasy the other day. It was super cool, you know, but I don't think there was a lot of Black folks in there. And I'm in so many places where there's not a lot of Black folks sometimes, but the Black aesthetic is there, be it the music, we are still the soil from which, you know, the cotton is grown, the hands that do the picking. Like, it's crazy, like how we're like reduced to this, you know, this like, this canvas of sorts, right? And that was a very troubling scene. Even his agent was like, "Man, you need a different agent. Like, I don't like this person. Like, you know, like."
Yeah, because a quote that I had put on a sweatshirt a few years ago: "They want our rhythm, but not our blues." And the cost that it takes, like everybody loves hip hop, but look how far we are from the 70s of the, you know, quoted origination of hip hop, DJ Kool Herc in the basement doing this fusion of music. And what was going on during that time? Like, what was the cost? What was the catalyst? What was the stress that, like, said, we need a basement party? We need something that's not at the, like, what was all of that that then produced the thing that we now, it's like, oh, hip hop is global. Yes, but we're so far down the narrative now that we forget that there was blues that created that rhythm, that there was a stress that created that sacredness. And I see it many times, especially in this film, where I'm just like, We are not the antelope that you hang on the head, the deer head that you hang on the wall, or the stuffed bear in the corner, or that big fish you got, then you stuff to tell everybody. Or
Yes.
if we want to be real, we're not the body parts of the black men that you hung and then took home and put in a jar on the mantle for people to see. We are not a commodity. Like, we produce these things. And I'm really wrestling with these days, and I won't go off on this tangent too long. I'm wrestling these days with the magpie syndrome. I'm noticing, a lot of people, even black people in Hollywood, with this sort of magpie syndrome. Magpies are birds who like shiny things. And so if they see like a Frito bag that's shiny, they'll run, grab it, and build their nest out of the shiny stuff. And it's like, as soon as somebody gets on, starts making something great, then here comes all of the people like, oh, I want you on my show, and I want you to do this thing, and I want you to do this. And I can see, as someone who's worked in the music industry before, how people get sucked into that. Also, I'm noticing the people who shun it. Like, I don't want anything. Like an Ingenue Ellis. She's not out there at all the parties doing all the things. She's about the work. And I think that that's very counter narrative for this commodification, this industrial complex of like bigger, grow more profit, be better. And I am here for it. And at the same time, want to adamantly say, I'm not the shiny thing that you can come hang above your bed. Like, you got me all the way messed up.
I would like to throw something out because I really appreciate this. And, not to go back to American fiction again, but, part of the bit of that was like producing a really crappy book for white folks to buy up, right? And like, was there a single time in Exhibiting Forgiveness that a black person praised this man's art? I'm even thinking about, at one point, the mother was like talking to his wife, was like, where's my song? I love your music. There was like distinct black praise. There wasn't a single black person that liked his art because it wasn't good. You was looking at, tell me, come on. You was looking at like, how the hell is this? Come on. Like, how are you doing so good for yourself? This is crap. Like, I'm not even trying. So I feel like there might have even been a layer to that. Like, it might have even it might have done even more subtlety than American fiction. It really presented a crappy ass artist that was only valued by white folks. Like, because there wasn't a single black person in that whole film that said anything good about his art. I don't think so. I can't remember it.
I don't remember, but I'm thinking there were women at the last exhibit when his father were there who were black women who were looking. But I do have to say, I loved it.
You did.
The art, I'm going to tell you, the art moved me because it's having conversations like a fifth or sixth character. I don't know how many people are in. But the the painting, when he cuts himself out of it,
I like that.
that
Was
for
fun.
me was such a strong narrative of, look at this sort of Americana, the boy on the bike riding. It ain't like that. So let me just remove myself from this, like this quintessential photo. And then the most striking, and I don't know if anyone else got this, but the three black boys having fun and playing carefree. I know the narrative of most black boys young is not so carefree, just hopping over the fence and having a good time. And when he takes white paint and puts it over their faces, I'm like, because they get to live that life. The one little black boy on the side is looking over at them. I'm sorry, I loved the art. It was telling me stories and making me feel, and it's cool. We don't agree, but I'm like, the art was moving me.
That's fair.
I think there was a conversation about erasure with the white, and that I understood. But also, I think for me, the removal of his likeness from the mowing scene that he painted was him removing himself from the trauma, removing himself from the conversation around what hurt him and why, taking himself out of that moment so that he could move on. Now, as an art piece, absolutely, but as a telling piece of the film, it was even more impressive.
So I want to move on real quick and just say, we've talked about, because we could talk about the art, but we've talked about forgiveness. And Ariel, you said, I don't even know what forgiveness is. I don't have a definition, but I will say, Iyanla says that forgiveness is a spiritual laxative. It's for you, not the other person. And Oprah co-wrote a book a few years ago that I think was titled "What Happened to You." which was saying we should start asking what happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you. When people get on our nerves and say, well, what's wrong with you? We should start asking the question, what happened to you? And in today's narrative, when we talk about forgiveness, because we love the Michelle Obama, we love to be the anti-Michelle Obama quote. When they go low, we go high. People are like, I ain't going high. Nope, I'm going just as low as you are. And I'm wondering, because in today's thinking of forgiveness, it's always a villain. But in this movie, I don't think that they're villains. I think the movie tries to unmask that there aren't any villains, and it's really what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. And so when I see that, I'm wondering to you how you saw forgiveness or even see forgiveness in terms of the villain theory, or did you see villains in this movie?
I don't see villains generally. I in my work have come to recognize that malice is a fantasy. I don't know that people have in their heart an attempt to harm me so much as they have an attempt to do themselves the best, right? To put themselves in the best position. So I don't know that the villains in this movie were people so much as they were situations, right? I know that capitalism is at bear because this gentleman's in need of money, of course, for his addiction, but he's pushing for the funds. Patriarchy is to bear in that he's producing another man under the strictures of what is expected, right? I know that at the center of this is a set of circumstances or inequities that push people to harm people. So I don't know that malice is at to bear. But in that question, then if we can remove malice, then we are stuck with what happened. And I think once we're able to see what happened and why, we're able to humanize. And that humanization is what gives us the opportunity to see the other in the experience and extend them grace. And I think that is what I've come to reckon as forgiveness.
Mhm.
I don't think there were villains because I don't think that is like that lacks the subtlety that this movie was going through. It wasn't really for the binaries and the dichotomy. So like I don't think the father, even though he made a series of mistakes, um, I didn't necessarily see him as a villain. I don't think you were supposed to necessarily see him as a villain, the mother included. But I do think that the way that this film presented forgiveness was really religious. I think like religion was central to the notion of forgiveness and the definition of forgiveness, and also the utility of forgiveness.
Mhm.
Like, why do you forgive? For your relationship with God
Mhm.
and for your relationship with the afterlife. So it wasn't forgiveness it wasn't forgiveness. It was a transactional, religiously oriented form of forgiveness. The mother was, that. So I do think in that sense, it 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 it, I mean that speaks deeply to the Black community and how we hold forgiveness, but also there's a lot of intramural levels of forgiveness that aren't going to be addressed if you strictly do it around religion as it was. What you've mentioned, Ariel, about kind of capitalism and patriarchy, like some of those things don't get unpacked as much because the definition of forgiveness in this film was so deeply religious, right? And and it was so deeply presented in a transactional way, which I even think could have happened less so. Um, but I think that is those are the conversations I have with my grandmother. Those are the conversations, so that's what we in many regards are deal with, right? So it wasn't that it was bereft of value. It was very valuable. But I do think there was at a pretty, in terms of thinking about dichotomies, the presentation of forgiveness was dichotomous. Like it was very much so in your relationship with God, and why you forgive isn't necessarily for the person, isn't necessarily for your community, isn't necessarily for healing. It's for organized religion and your relationship with with God. So I do think in a way forgiveness could have more levels to it, if it wasn't so structured in that regard. But I still thought the presentation was very valuable. But I do think there was a distinct definition, or at least like level around which forgiveness was presented.
I will say yes. And for the mother, absolutely. I think for him, this was more of that. It's a spiritual laxative. He is a creative. He is an artist. And that's a spiritual connection, not religious. That's a spiritual connection, I believe, to create. And I think that he was so bloated and backed up that he was like, I can't carry this anymore. I can't do this, and I won't do this with you anymore, which is the ending of the film of him saying, basically, like, I release me from you. It's not even like I'm going to pass all this because I can't walk around with this anymore. I'm trying to raise this son and do it differently. And carrying around the weight of what y'all did 20 years ago. And even in the conversation of trying to say, you did this to me and it hurt. And for me, it was triggering of just like, yeah, but I did it because of all these things. And it's like, but you never acknowledged that even if you had a good reason for doing it, it caused your son pain. And so and I'm sure he didn't have the language as many Black men. I know my stepfather didn't. I know my father didn't have the language to ask for forgiveness, didn't have the language to even forgive themselves in a sense. I think it's just a complete like, okay, that never happened, or it happened and you should just move on. I remember being probably around 35 and I contacted my best friend from the third grade. We'd been, friends for years. Um, and I said to him, growing up, this thing happened to me. Like you were my friend and you were around, but this thing happened to me and I'm really struggling with it. And he was like, yo, okay, you just gotta get over it. You gotta let that stuff go. And I was mad at him for like a year. Like we still talk, but I had this residual anger because again, I wasn't being heard. I thought, but what I came to was he didn't have the capacity. He too doesn't have the language and the capacity to be like, how do you address this? You play basketball, which is why I think we have so many fights on the basketball court, because that's the one time we get our passion, our anger, and our adrenaline up, and then we're able to release that, and sexually, which is why they think that Black men are all very sexual all the time. And I'm like, but you have to realize this energy goes somewhere, so we have to release it somewhere. But overall, I think that in terms of forgiveness in this film, I'm wondering for you, do you think he ever, religious language, repents or changes his mind and talks to his father again or tries to talk to his father?
Yeah, I do. I do. And I think that probably has to do more with the fact that I think his son was at an age. It would have been very different if this film would have been so different if the son was 2 or if the son was 10. But the fact that he was like 5, 6, like around that age, I think there's some formative years, there's going to be some blurriness and he's going to have questions. So I think he'll probably do it for his son.
As someone who has cut off their parents before, due to working towards forgiveness and understanding that they are human first, parents second, and we're working to figure out how to be a person while trying to take care of another person. I understand that there's a great probability that he will, especially as someone who is human first and a parent second, trying to raise another person, and coming to understand those flaws and perceived failures through the lens of a tiny human who's alongside for the ride. I think he'll start to see his father more in his son's eyes. And I think part of what drove him away from his father was the scene where he kind of woke up angry and he saw his father when he looked in his kid's eyes. And I think as the kid grows, he'll figure out that there's more to the conversation. I think some of the blacks and whites will gray as his hair does, of course. But he'll figure out that there's a conversation to be had with his father about how to be a father. And also, he was thinking about, he'll probably look back on the video he took of his father talking about his grandfather.
Yep.
And how that conversation was so dense, even though it was so short. There was so much he learned about how his father became the man he was. And of course, while he's going through that film, he's going to remember and feel those feelings and again contextualize them through uh, Jermaine. And he's gonna talk to
Yeah.
that man. It's inevitable.
Well, I have two more questions before we wrap up here. One more sort of long form question, and that is the question of generational trauma and generational healing. This isn't just the reason I love this story is because it is so universal. I get the privilege of doing pastoral counseling with a lot of people, whether formal and informal. And there's a lot of stories where people say, but you only got one mama. And people come to me and be like, yeah, but let me tell you what my mama was like.
Mhm.
So that doesn't really serve us. Or, but that's your father. No matter what, that's your father. Yeah, but if he is harming me in the process of my development, what do I do with that? And so I think that there's a lot more advanced conversation about that now. But what do you think I'm just going to be honest and say, I wanted everybody in the Black community to sit down with their troubled family members and those brothers and sisters who went through the same things. I can't even get my brothers and sisters to watch it. But they're like, yeah, we'll watch it later. And I think that a part of it is because it's like, that's a little close to home. I don't really want to deal with the verbally abusive or maybe even physically abusive father, whatever that is, or even the mother who just, defends the man that she loves. But what do you think this film offers to the community, however you define community, to the community or the family around trauma and healing?
I could say it affords us a grammar to kind of grapple with the fact that violence and love do not coexist. And so, as we're looking at our parents who tried to develop us in ways that they understood to be loving, as we've come to understand what love is, we have to hold them accountable. Uh, this is what it looks like to hold feet to the flame. This is what it looks like to develop ourselves in a way that we can be in relation to our parents while still expecting that they understand that what they did was harmful. Because some of our parents find it difficult to take responsibility because they were acting in the way that they knew how. They were using the tools they had to build the person they thought we should be. But two things can coexist, and that is you hurt me and you were trying, right? And so that is a conversation that I think this movie gives us a grammar to grapple.
I would agree with that. I'm only thinking like when you're ready. Um, so it's like it gives you something to work toward. Because I don't know if everyone's ready for all the crayon and the worms and the dirt, when they open this one up. And I've learned this about myself. I'm a Gemini and I've always had to facilitate conversations in my family. I feel like as a Gemini, I'm really just confrontational and like I'm just ready to have that conversation. Like I know where I'm coming from. I know I'm not trying to be right. I know I'm not trying to prove nothing. I'm not trying to hurt nobody. So if I fumble and say something I don't mean to say, like, where I'm coming from. But I've learned that intention doesn't always cut it, and just because I'm ready for a conversation and I know where my intentions are doesn't mean that I can't hurt somebody's feelings. Right. So I've learned that I've had to take some time to step back and have conversations with people when they're ready. Right. So because if you have conversations too quick about certain things without that tenderness and that care and that strategy, right? Like then so I'm not sure what this gives people in the community who aren't ready for it yet. So I'm gonna be straight up. If you've had to ask your mother to leave your father and you haven't really sat with that with both of your parents, had the opportunity to sit with that with both your parents, talk to therapists about it for years, you might not want to watch this film. I'm speaking from a personal experience, right? So you might not want to watch this film. So I'm not sure, it's kind of inside baseball. I'm not sure if what it does for the community who's not ready for it. So I'll say that, but I also will say that, my grandmother said, my late grandmother said, shoulds and ifs don't exist. You do with what you have. And I feel like to your point, Ariel, about the grammar, I do think this is a really good example, of what we see a lot of our parents talk about. We weren't working with shoulds and ifs. We were working with what we had, and that sometimes is awful, but it doesn't, but that's a cycle. Just because it's awful doesn't mean that you can grapple with something else. We've been given wastelands, as an environmental scholar, I know this. We've been given wastelands, but what we have to do, learn how to build on things. And that's what we've been doing for generations.
That's exactly what Andra Day sings when she was like, no foundation, building with bricks we were never given, learning to hear when no one ever heard us. All of those things, I think, is we're making it up as we go along. We're
Building
figuring it out brick by brick.
Yep.
So the last thing I'll do is I'm going to tell you my favorite quote. I
Okay.
want your response to it, or you can tell me your favorite quote. And it may be your favorite quote too. But Anjanou Ellis, when she said, "You are the hardest working man I know, except for at relationships. Relationships are hard work."
Mhm.
That I needed them to pause the movie because I never had I heard it put such a weight. Never, I mean, even in another format, like, or fashion. And I feel like I wanted to call every Black man I knew, my brothers with their children, my stepfather who can't even hear me now because of illness, but just wanted to be like the hardest working man I know, except for at relationships, because relationships are hard work.
Yeah.
So that was my favorite quote. Your response, or you had a favorite quote?
Yeah, the doors of the church are now open. That's after that, I was like, okay, so this is what we're doing. No, that was one. That was the one for me. I took pause. I wanted to pause the film, but I knew we had to get through it. But yeah, because again, the folks that we're talking about, they've committed themselves to building worlds, building people with their bare hands and the bare essentials often. But interpersonal relationships always just trip them up. And man, I will be honest, my eyes got a little sweaty at that part, because that's exactly the relationship I'm trying to work through in my own life. Forgive me if I'm oversharing, but my mom's a fire marshal, like a lieutenant, and in the fire marshal's department, and she's sheriff, and she's able to tackle the world, a racist world, right, that doesn't see her as a full person. She's able to do all of that. Man, do we struggle to connect, right? Man, do we get into the biggest fights on the planet when I'm just trying to ask her to love me the way I understand, right? I want that phrase on a t-shirt. I know, Karmen, that's your thing. If you can give me one and then an extra large, it'd be great. But that was the full stop of the film for me. That was the climax.
Yeah. No, I also appreciate that statement. It also makes me just think about how few of us like really recognize what emotional labor is. Like it is. I'm learning we really don't even know what that is, So it's like that's oftentimes we think I don't even know what we think emotional labor is. Like worrying if we can provide enough, or worrying if she's at home. I don't know what it even is. But like what constitutes emotional labor for many Black men is very, very narrow, very ill-defined, and not practiced. And so I think like that is what that also really spoke to more generally too, because that's what a lot of emotional labor really boils down to, is the reckoning with relationships, holding them, thinking about timing, thinking about tenderness. Tenderness is a muscle, that tenderness isn't something that's just soft. I oftentimes think about there's certain things when you're learning how to be a surgeon that you have to learn to like give up parts of your body, because you can't trust your body to hold your hand still long enough to do the surgery. So you have to learn how to rest it on the body of the person that you're doing the surgery on. Like there's a very delicate, and that's something that's iterative. It needs to be done. If you need to change, you need to find that spot. When you're working on it, you have to find that spot. And there's that tenderness to do the hard work, right? Like tenderness is something that can do what muscles can't. it can really hold something, right? And I think like that is, the work building those muscles we don't have practice with. And that's because oftentimes we have to do so many other forms of labor. But I feel like one of my favorite quotes, I'll have to think about it because there is a couple funny ones too, but something that stuck to me when I'm thinking back about it, there were so many things about the wife that weren't really addressed, but when she gave him a look and he was kind of like, the studio's yours. Like there was something about that kind of gave me chills that he was a problem. Right? That like he was a problem in his own house, kind of like taking up too much space, all about his art, and like she didn't have her time to shine. And like that statement, and it was never brought up again, right? Like in terms of like her art space and whatever. But that really stuck out to me as like, that's a lot. Oof, they've had some sticky over that one.
Yeah.
Or
I mean, I can only imagine, the writer in me makes up stories of people at restaurants, but I'm sitting there thinking, oh yeah, this has been your outlet. And so for you to show up in the world for her, you need this other outlet. And this outlet, because your problems are so much bigger, your outlet, and it's the thing you make money with, needs to take precedence. And so I'm sure they've had many conversations about like, your outlet is not bigger than like I need the same. Like I'm not just the so I've already had that conversation in my head.
I love the "it's your turn." I love that they were balancing each other as well. And there was one scene where they were doing music where she was showing him the song. He was like, "Can I get a little more yellow?"
that was a good one. That was a good one.
Can I get a little more? Because he's speaking to her in his language, and she's trying to interpret it in hers. That
was cool. That was cool.
Yeah.
She could do fewer gymnastics with the vocals, but
Incorrect.
He said incorrect. Absolutely not.
I would have not listened to that song again. But not at once. But
I feel like I'm at the barbershop.
not a singular time. And I love sultry song, but to me it sounded like she didn't have a strong voice. So
let's rise up.
Not to say I like to sing, but like I'm just saying. We don't need to go into all of that.
We'll go on that offline
for the day.
I don't know why I'm critiquing the art so hard today.
Do you think, have we even had the space generationally to even like stop and do the emotional work of forgiveness? I'll say we're choosing now, but like previously, have we even had the space?
I don't know that forgiveness has ever been an option. I think, as I've said in a number of ways, a subjugation is necessary for the project of the world to exist. So, like you said, we're busy. We've got so much on our plate. The emotional labor, as Jason put it, is often the last thing we get to consider. Add to that the epigenetic trauma, the post-traumatic slave disorder, right? We've got enough to worry about that's held in our bodies to the point where I don't know that we know what life is like without it.
I think like most things, like forgiveness is something that's iterative. It's not linear. It's not in the sense that it always gets better or worse, or it's always getting better. But I do think I know that I've had enough examples in my family, despite all the issues, that like I know that I can forgive better than my mother. And my mother can forgive better than her mother. And my grandmother can forgive better than her grandmother. Right? Well, I think probably my great grandmother could forgive better than my grandmother. So again, it's not always linear, right? So I do think we have as a very dynamic, non-monolithic community, we have had many examples that have showed us how to try. And I think what forgiveness trying is doing. And I think like we have gotten better at it, and we will continue to get better at it. And we have the capacity. Like that is something that I think that I'm always just, even if we're not there, Black folks got capacity for days. That's all, So do we have the capacity for forgiveness? Heck yeah. Are we fully there yet? No, no one is, but we have more capacity than anybody. Because I think, and I think, well, and I'm not sure when that's going to get there, but I'm of the opinion, I fight for things I'm not going to see in my lifetime, So like you inch toward hoping that people carry on and get a little bit closer to it, and, I think that's one of the issues, with the, the intramural violence is that we experience, not when we just don't have what we want, but when we have what we want, one of the way, it's one of those things with revolution, that's always so devastating is that they're most violent, not when you're fighting the enemy. It's when you have power with the people that you fought for and fought with, it's, I always think of like the Haitian Revolution in that regard, when Louverture had to kill his nephew, just because they had fought for so long towards something and then they disagreed, so I think like we have so much practice and pain in that kind of that intramural struggle, when it's triage, everybody's bleeding. You're trying to think about who you can, who's going to bleed out in 20 minutes versus who's going to bleed out in 40 minutes versus who's going to bleed out in 60 minutes, right? We're always making these types of decisions, right? But that's the everyday nature of, of struggle we're struggling for. So I do think we have had the experiences, we've had the examples to know that we can forgive better. And we have the capacity to reach that. Mm-hmm. But I do agree with Ariel in the sense of just like this, the modern world as it is built off of the extraction of Blackness. In many ways, we weren't extended that privilege. And forgiveness is a position of privilege, or at least it is impacted by that. So I agree. But I also think that, if I'm going to give anything the benefit of the doubt, it's going to be Black folks.
You want to say something? Go ahead.
I think you hit it on the head, though, Jason. It is a position of privilege, and I don't know that we have the privilege. I think in order to forgive, you have to be equal in power in order to extend it. So I don't know that we have the positionality to extend the grace to a number of folks. But I think when we're talking about intergenerational forgiveness, we're still not equal in those conversations, right? There's a level of deference necessary for us to even have the conversation, and I think that's part of what makes that's part of what developed the difficulty, right? Yeah. But again, it is triage. We are trying to figure out who's wounded at what level and how immediate are their needs. And so I think as we start to sort through that, the conversation about power and who can be triaged is definitely one that we're working towards a more holistic understanding with, in concert with the understanding of all the traumas that are affecting the way that we are present. So I believe yes and.
Last question, and I'll go first to give you some time to think. But if you could summarize the film's message to the world in one sentence, what would it be? If you could summarize the film's message to the world in one sentence, what would it be? And I am just reading this and coming up with it too. So I will say some version of, as I have not processed this before I'm saying it, some version of what the wife said to him, which is if you don't deal with the baggage you picked up at home, every home you go to, it'll be there.
I will quote myself, and that's something I've been saying for decades. Family is a technology that needs to evolve.
Mm,
Put that on a t-shirt, coffee mug. Uh,
absolutely.
family is a technology that needs to evolve. Mm.
I definitely don't have any sentences as good as these. But I'm also the type of writer who never writes great, and writes great sentences first off. Um,
Boo.
I've never not edited a sentence now.
Uh,
Um,
sure, we just make these up.
um, message to the world. Well, first, I don't think it has a message to the world. I think it has a message to Black folks.
Mm.
And I think that message is, what is art? Because the way we are all living and living through is art too. So I think there's on display a lot of forms of skill, a lot of forms of care, and like it's, if you really just think about, yeah, you asked for one sentence, so I shouldn't explain.
This is so hard. You get people who are scholars and writers together and be like, one sentence. What? I don't get 500 words.
How many dashes can I put in?
Right.
Commas and dashes sprinkled all the way through.
I guess my sentence was, what is art? Once I put the question mark there, I was done. No dashes to save me.
Okay, now I'm trying to rework it in my head. Never mind.
Yeah.
Thank you both, Jason, Maurice Porter, and Ariel Prater, for being with me. Y'all are brothers, y'all are scholars, and I appreciate your insights. Although, Jason, we will let you slide on your questionable art taste today. But, no, I truly appreciate y'all sharing your time with me and being here at the heart of the moment. Forgiveness. It's one of the hardest things we're asked to do as human beings. And when we're hurt, when the wound cuts deep, it can feel impossible. The film we're unpacking today doesn't just tell the story of forgiveness. It challenges us to confront what forgiveness really means. It's not about excusing the harm or pretending it didn't happen. No, it's about breaking the chains that pain and resentment wrap around us. It's about freedom, not for the other person who wronged us, but for ourselves. At the heart of the moment, for Black men especially, forgiveness carries layers of complexity. It's not just personal, it's generational. It's systemic. It's tied to a world that too often demands we bear the burden of reconciliation without addressing the injustice that caused the fracture. So the question we're sitting with today isn't just, how do we forgive? It's what happens when we do. Because forgiveness isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a revolution in how we live, love, and heal. I'm Karmen Michael Smith, and I'm encouraging you to let disruption be the catalyst for your liberation.